And thank you all for coming. It's a real honor to be here. And I particularly want to thank Danae in the back for her extraordinary organization in getting me here and organizing everything. So thank you very, very much. So I know I have this kind of strange title. And I'm actually going to sort of back into my categories. So I'm really going to start out with digital humanities and talk about how digital humanities works with libraries, and then sort of where bibliographic description and data visualization come into that. And just because there are as many definitions of digital humanities as there seem to be people who self-identify into that community, I thought I would just take a quick second to get this out of the way and say, when I'm talking about digital humanities today, what am I talking about? This is one of the, I guess, older definitions of digital humanities from the Blackwell Companion to Digital Humanities from 2004 by Susan Schreibner, Ray Siemens, and John Unsworth. And I really love it because, first of all, it's incredibly broad, and it really means that digital humanities is about the questions, and it's about how you approach them and how you think about what you're doing, and not necessarily specifically what you're doing at any given moment, or what the outcome of what you're doing especially looks like, which I think is really important. When people talk about digital humanities is a hot topic. It can get a lot of attention, and I think that's great because as someone who is part of the digital humanities community, I think as a community we have a lot to offer all of our colleagues in the university, libraries, and beyond. But it is not, and I have no interest in policing the boundaries of what constitutes digital humanities. So using information technology to illuminate the human record and bringing an understanding of the human record to bear on the development and use of technology. Now, if that doesn't at least in part sound like a library catalog, then I'm not sure what does. And I'm going to particularly be talking about information technology and illumination and development in this talk. My own background is actually not in library science, it's in history. I am a historian of the early American Foreign Service, and I look at questions of how you get a foreign service when you were a colony and an empire controlled your foreign policy. And I look at that mostly through letters. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the kind of research that I do that pulled me into digital humanities. And this is just, once again, one small subset of what it might mean to be a digital humanist. This is what it means for me to be a digital humanist. It means that I take a data set of letters. And in particular, I take them from the papers of John Jay from Columbia University Libraries. Thank you so much, documentary editors. And they have, this is actually an older version of the site, but it's the version of the site that I worked with, a list of all of the letters that were sent or received by John Jay. That's what a papers project is. This is a sort of small subset of archival metadata. This is not an EAD. This is not a deeply nested finding aid. But it is metadata about letters. We have the date, we have the author, we have the recipient, and we have the repository it came from because there are lots of copies of these things all over the place for any number of reasons. There's also, you can't quite see it here, but there's this one JID 0888. Can you tell I spent some time with this? That has 564 images that spans 5 months. And those are actually all the enclosures that were sent to Jay, all the letters that were forwarded to Jay while he was negotiating what became known as Jay's Treaty in 1794. And just the very, very short, if my dissertation advisor hears me say this, he's going to fall over, version of Jay's Treaty. For those of you who may not remember, Jay's Treaty is basically the reason that the War of 1812 wasn't the War of 1795. The Americans and the British very nearly went to war 12 years after the end of the American Revolution over a number of issues. John Jay was dispatched as an emergency, actually an envoy extraordinaire, to deal with the problem in London, and the Secretary of State, Edmund Randolph, was shoveling him information as fast as he could about all of the problems everywhere. So this is what I get from the archive. It's a digital archive. It's been remediated. I have images of microfilm. I have lists of letters. I'm also a database architect. And so I actually wanted to unpack those letters out into the entire world that they came from. And this is a big part of my work, is thinking about the ways that when we structure data in a digital environment, the kinds of affordances it can give for research. So I built a system called Project Quincy, named after John Quincy Adams, because I'm a foreign policy nerd. And I basically mapped out the world, and in particular, I mapped out the letters. And I took that list, I took the images of the letters, I took the basic to, from, and dates, and then I exploded it, right? Who it was sent to, where, when. I went into the letters, I tried to interpret, or I tried to infer when a letter might have been received. Sometimes the diplomats were very conscientious. They actually marked that. Sometimes they even marked when it was docketed or archived. Sometimes they didn't, and you can infer it from other parts of the correspondence, like when they respond to a letter. And then I had things about enclosures, so letters connect to other letters. And this is a sort of, for those of you who've seen database diagrams before, this is a sort of stylized entity relationship diagram. It's actually the output of a software program I wrote called Davila, which takes a database schema and allows you to visualize it, color code it, and annotate it in sort of open and closed modules. So I did all of that, and I did it because it's fun for me. But I really did it so that I could start doing things like this, which was, where were the letters coming from? Who was writing to John Jay in this moment of extraordinary crisis when Britain and France are pummeling each other on land and on sea? So if you're trying to get a letter across the Atlantic, good luck. Or trying to get one out of the West Indies. So what is the geographic distribution? It's pretty important to understand the Foreign Service at this time. What is also the social network of these letters? How are people, so places are connected by letters. People are connected by letters. And so who's writing whom? And this whole thing in here, that was that JID 888, 564, that I went in and disambiguated and figured out who was writing what. There was a kind of a partial manifest. Those of you who are familiar with receiving archival collections will know exactly what I'm talking about. Somebody kind of wrote a typescript of what was in the box, and it was more or less accurate, except for all the times that it wasn't. And I put all of that into my system. There are about 300 letters in here. And then I also wanted to look at other things, like so inside London, inside the capital of the British Empire, who's writing John Jay? Well, there's his negotiating counterpart, and then there's the American minister who Jay was sent to augment in crisis, and then there are a bunch of other people. And so I had these sort of sets of visualizations. And so when I talk about metadata, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not a library catalog or an EAD, but the reason that we make those. The ways in which we take something that exists in the world, whether it's born digital, born analog, a digital surrogate of something that was analog, some future hybrid we have yet to invent, and then have to figure out how to catalog, and think about what are the constituent features of that thing that we've decided matter for what we want to do with it in an environment, right? Library catalogs predate the development of relational databases. They predate the development of XML. They predate the development of RDF. They predate any of the digital ways that we have of recording information. And anyone here who remembers transitioning a card catalog into the first digital system knows that it's kind of a lossy process. Not everything made it over, and not just that there were cards that got lost, but there was information on cards that got lost, no matter how conscientious everyone was at the time. It's just a vast transformation of the medium. In fact, you made a digital model, and I would say an argument about what a library card was, and then tried to explain that to a computer. And that was your library catalog. And that is, to me, what metadata is. It's taking a thing, or usually, hopefully, a collection of things that have some things in common but some things different, so you aren't just modeling one single object, but you're getting a broader sweep, and figuring out the salient features. If you wanted to make an argument about what this thing is and you want to make that argument to a computer, what do you want to tell it? What do you need it to know? And when you do that, you're making decisions about what matters about that object. Not in a for all time epistemological sense or ontological sense of what is this object fundamentally, but you are saying, this is how this thing is going to be able to be used. And incidentally, this is probably how it's not going to be able to be used. And here's why I'm privileging this use case, and here's why I'm privileging this other use case. This isn't even particularly about user-centered design. It's just that you never design something without at least one user in mind, even if it's just yourself. I designed that whole database with, it's on the web. It's called the Early American Foreign Service Database. You can go, you can play with it. It's getting a little old. I need to update the code again. But I had an initial user in mind, which was me. And then I was planning on sharing what I needed to do my research with everybody else who wanted to do research, which has been a rocky process because I highly customized that system for exactly what I needed. And I spent some time thinking about what other people would need, but really I was the user, I was the primary user. And I'm now figuring out, a couple years later, what it might take to really let other people be users and power users of a system that I designed for myself, pretty much. And this is in a lot of ways what digital humanities does. When I talked about information technology and illuminating the record, I think of metadata. I think of picking out those salient features so that you can illuminate, so that you can get this thing into a digital environment, make it susceptible to computational models and algorithmic analysis that is useful to you, and see where it goes. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you get results that are helpful, sometimes you get results that are unhelpful. Sometimes your unhelpful results show you things that you didn't realize were there. Sometimes your unhelpful results just show you that you made a catastrophic error and you have to go back. But that's sort of what I think about, and that's how I approach library catalogs. And I should have put this slide up earlier. This is a quote from the scholar Deb Verhoeven from an article called Doing the Sheep Good, which is about databases, data structures, and how they structure thought and reality and what we need to take into account. And what Deb says is that as truly engaged academics, we don't just learn from the data itself, but also from the way that data is used and reused. Right? And once again, I'm thinking of catalogs, and I'm thinking of finding aids. And one of the things, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the work I did visualizing a particular library catalog a couple years ago. But one of the interesting things about catalogs is that it's not like cataloging practices have stayed consistent since the origin of any one particular university library's catalog. And so the catalog itself, as much as it is an engine for access and findability, has within itself layers of previous concepts of representation and layers of previous ideas of what it meant to have access. And sometimes that's the signal, and sometimes that's the noise. It sort of depends on what you're trying to do with the catalog and how you're trying to use it and what you want to use it for. So, what is my next slide? Okay. This talk actually underwent something of a change last night. So bear with me. Because yesterday, I got into DC a little early, and I finally got a chance to go to the Wonder exhibit at the Renwick Gallery, which closes on May 8th. And I don't know how many of you in this room have had a chance to avail yourself of this amazing exhibit. If you haven't gone, go. It's incredible. The Renwick Gallery was, as I learned yesterday, the first building in the United States to be built to house art, to be an art museum. And there's a bunch of really interesting information about the architect, about how he thought. They called it the American Louvre. This whole 1840s, we are Americans and we make art too, very much nationalistic project, but it's a gorgeous building, as many nationalistic projects create. And it went through multiple uses, and then it underwent an extensive renovation, which just ended, I think, about less than a year ago. And instead of just opening the doors with the collection, they said, we have this space. We have this amazing space that nobody thinks of as a space. They just think of it as a museum. Think of the stuff that's in it. They don't think of the building. And so the curators, with amazing foresight, and I'm just blown away by this exhibit, commissioned artists to build a gallery-sized art installation for each of the major rooms to highlight the space. And you walk in and it's amazing. And actually, as I was walking around, I heard two college-age students, and one said, I actually like this better than the art. And I'm thinking, this is art. What, are you crazy? It's not a painting, it's not on a wall, it's definitely art. This is the first thing you see. It's called Untitled by Tara Donovan. This photo was actually taken by the photographer Ron Blunt. The rest of the photos you see later are mine. And this is a sort of standing stones. She didn't title it, and she refuses in the description to say what it might be. But she does say what it's made of. It's made of index cards. Hundreds, thousands of index cards. And if you get close up, you can see that there are these little edges that ripple around. So as a historian who was trained, before historians were automatically trained to use databases, not that all historians are now trained to use and build their own databases, I used to be told by my teachers to put every fact on a 3x5 index card and put it in a little box. And when I went to write my paper, I was supposed to rearrange the index cards. And so I looked at this thing, and I was like, it's like someone dumped out a university's worth of index cards and shaped them into these towers. I usually think about metadata regularly when I'm walking around. Not just when I'm going to give a talk on it the next day. And then I started to think, an index card, this probably is because of the talk, an index card looks a lot like a library catalog card. They're not that different. And I don't mean to suggest that anyone do violence to an old card catalog by dumping it out and shaping it like this. But in some ways, this is what library subject headings kind of are. We have all of these things, and we have to group them, and we have to distinguish them, and we have to put them together with things that are both like and unlike, and we're not quite sure until we poke around. And so there's this amazing space that is in of itself, as an art gallery, a container, right? A set of categories, a way of organizing structures, right? A schema. When you've built an art museum, you can put the art where the museum architect will let you put the art, unless you're willing to take down walls. Or in this case, they'll probably put up some false walls in the middle of the exhibit to break up these enormous spaces. But they are these containers. They are these sort of larger categories into which things have been shaped to create other categories. And in many ways, when we're designing schemas or when we're implementing schemas, although honestly, any sufficiently complex schema to be of genuine use to researchers is never just implemented. It's always kind of fudged, right, somewhere around the edges, because you're dealing with interesting, wacky stuff that doesn't quite fit any of the categories. So you try and push it in where it does least violence. But when we're designing them as digital humanists, or as people with a completely new archive that they have to catalog, we're both thinking about the pre-existing containers that we know, the rooms, right, and the stuff that we've got, and how it connects. So all metadata schemas are sort of both organically grown and a priori determined, right? They come from both sides, and that's where their power is. There's a kind of logical structure to them that we sort of know how things should be grouped, and so we usually group them that way, unless we have a very good reason not to, right? And then we're very clear about that. But then we also have to look at what we've got, and what of it is more like other things than not like other things. So this piece just kind of blew me away, and it had to go in the talk. And when we're doing this, there are, okay. So that's one idea of a library catalog. And then the other one that was already in the talk, before I went to the gallery, is the Digital Public Library of America, right? Which is this vast online aggregator of library catalog records from all around the country, and particularly from public libraries. And one of the great things about the DPLA is that they've really put a lot of focus into interface design and into different ways of looking at things. So just on their homepage right here, right, you can see there's over 13 million items. They do exhibits. They have a map explorer. They have a date explorer or a timeline explorer. And they also have a sort of virtual bookshelf that will pull up a sort of simulated spines of books so that you can sort of browse the shelves or browse your search. And then there are a whole bunch of other apps that they've created. You can browse the DPLA by color. You can also connect the DPLA up with Europeana, because not everything happened in America, apparently. And a whole bunch of other things. And so this is sort of another way of thinking about taking all of that stuff and finding ways of shaping it, finding ways of looking at it, and looking at it sort of slant, right? We don't usually search for books in a library catalog by place of publication. More on that later. We sometimes explore by date, but it's not usually the primary way that we do it. And I love the DPLA, and I think they're doing extraordinary work. There is so much stuff in here, and also because they have most of their records from the Hathi Trust, which I'll talk about a little later, there are so many duplicates of stuff in here, despite the best efforts and extraordinary metadata cleanup of everyone involved in the process, that it can be a little hard. You really have to start to really refine your search before you can start to locate things, as any good librarian will tell you. But you still get a sort of slant-wise look at information overload through these apps, which I find really fascinating. And they surface the ways that we think about searching by making us look different, right? So I don't think I'm probably going to get any major arguments about this particular statement. All data is theory-laden. But I would like at this point to just add that all metadata is theory-laden as well. When we create categories, when we do this world building, when we map the a priori onto that which we have, we are constructing an argument. We are making a theory, and we are speaking from the positions that we know and are comfortable with, or the positions that we've heard about and we think we should know more about or need to be represented. And there's been some really great writing on this, not especially by me, but one of my favorite pieces is by Beth Sadler and Chris Borg. It appeared in the Library Journal about a year ago, and it's called Feminism and the Future of Library Discovery. Chris Borg is now the head librarian at MIT. Beth Sadler is one of the main developers from Blacklight and the Hydra project in open source library catalogs. And they talk about the ways that library catalogs often reflect the dominant power structures of the day, and how cataloging changes over time, but still needs to change, and how we need to think very critically about the way that the rooms that we put stuff into, basically, and what that means and how things look. And I was particularly reminded of the Sadler-Borg article, was it a week or two ago, when the Republican congresswoman introduced a bill to force the Library of Congress to not change the subject heading for illegal aliens. Did everybody hear about? Everyone heard about? Okay, right, yeah. So the process came up through various constituencies. The Library of Congress decided that illegal alien was maybe not a preferred category that they wanted to be using anymore for a number of reasons that came from their constituents. And so they're replacing alien generally with non-citizen, and illegal alien with, I think it's unauthorized immigration, right, to cover a sort of range of ways that terms have changed. And a congresswoman and 20 of her colleagues, only 20, decided that they actually wanted to put forward a bill that would force the Library of Congress to change it back, because they didn't like the idea of calling people who have done undocumented, unauthorized immigration anything other than illegal aliens, right? So in case we forget, if we ever did, that these categories are problematic, contested, and have a great deal of power behind them, and not just, soft power, but, governments get involved on some level when we start to talk about particular issues. On the other hand, looks like the category is staying, and that is a very good thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I promised I'd talk about visualizing a catalog. This is a project that I did. I didn't do it alone. I worked with Jim Egan, who's a professor of English at Brown University, when I was there in the library as their first Digital Humanities librarian. And we ambitiously titled our project the Mapping Colonial America's Publishing Project. And we were going to map all of America's publishing. Yeah. Didn't quite get there. But we were at Brown, which meant that we had access to the catalog of the John Carter Brown Library, which is a premier independent research library that has an actual stated mission of comprehensive collections for the Americas before 1800. And Jim and I are both scholars of early America, he on the literature side, me on the history side. And so we decided that we should make use of what was here. We actually first started with the American Antiquarian Society database, which Jim got a data dump from them in the form of a CSV file, which we played around with. We sort of looked at the subject categories that the Antiquarian Society had assigned to works over the years, and really over the years. You can't see it at this resolution level, but this giant blue thing here is titled nonfiction, because of all of the fiction that was published in the US, in what became the US before 1800. So these are clearly, and then over time the categories get more fine-grained, they get more, and it's really fascinating to watch how people change the way they describe their own collections. And the American Antiquarian Society is very aware of other cataloging schemas, but they also have some in-house stuff, because their stuff is so strange. They have one of the biggest collections of ephemera and broadsides and poems and sermons and all sorts of stuff. So they have some of their own metadata categories as well. And then we decided to sort of map it to see where it lay out. But the American Antiquarian Society, like the DPLA, is nationally bounded, pretty much, in what they collect. It's the American Antiquarian Society, so what became the United States of America. But for most of the period that the American Antiquarian Society collects, as anyone at the American Antiquarian Society would be more than happy to tell you, the United States didn't exist yet. And it was 13 of many other British colonies in North America. And this is where the JCB collections come in. So the Brown University Library Catalog And this is an early version. There's actually a much better demo up on the site. I don't know if this QR code works at this resolution. But you can try it, or I can give you the URL later. But I've learned that if the purpose of your talk is not to give a software demo, don't try and give a live demo, because the number of things that can go wrong goes through the roof. So this is a poster I made of the project about 2 years ago. And so this is a time slider, and you can sort of see where things are published when. And it creates a map, not unlike what the DPLA did. Except this is rare book cataloging, not general circulation cataloging. And rare book cataloging practices say that you should faithfully reproduce the title page of the book in the relevant cataloging fields when you're transitioning to a MARC record. There were 217 places of publication that, upon further investigation, could reasonably be considered Mexico City. And that's just one example. American universities, Yale, Harvard, liked to Latinize their places of publication. So Novi Porti, Connecticut is not actually Newport, Rhode Island moved, but it's New Haven in Latin from Yale University Press. I had a fun week in Open Refine, going through, there are about 40, oh, by the way, there are about 40,000 books behind this map. And if you go to the live version, you click on any of them, it'll actually take you into the catalog. So you can find the book, and we restricted ourselves to things that were physically on the Brown campus, which was convenient since we had the JCB right there. This kind of work, right? So much work goes into creating the catalog for the John Carter Brown Library. I am in awe of the catalogers. I got to know them very well doing this project. And I really see the value of having that transcription of the title page. Because what if the title page was lost? We wouldn't know what was on it. There's a very, very good reason for doing it. But nobody ever thought of making a map out of that data. And if they'd thought about making a map, they probably would have created the catalog differently, which doesn't mean that they did it wrong and that I'm suddenly doing it right. But there's nothing like taking a data set that was created for one set of use cases and trying to use it for another set of use cases when you all of a sudden come up against all of the hidden assumptions that everybody knew about and nobody ever had to surface because the use cases were humming along just fine and everything was great. And of course, the last thing that I would ever want to suggest is that a university library, particularly a rare books collection, should slow down its acquisition rate so that you can do more in-depth cataloging, right? Making this kind of records are incredibly time-consuming, highly technically specific, and very difficult. But somebody may come along and want to mess with it. And they might make something that you actually kind of like. And so thinking about cataloging practices as one argument from your data, and thinking that other people might want to make other arguments based in part on your data, is a really great place to start. Making your catalog records available to the extent that you can to people who might want to mess with this, to the book historians on your campus, who may have lots of questions and lots of really interesting things to say about those materials and how they're actually recorded could be really useful, whether you pair them with a database designer and a data visualization specialist or not. But inviting people in to look at how they find their materials and why they find them the way they find them. One of the things that was really fun for both for Jim Egan and for me working on this project was we'd spent our whole adult lives working at libraries or in libraries, working with library catalogs. But we never really neither of us had ever really pulled the hood back. And we were like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I mean, I knew about EADs, I knew about other things like that, but I didn't know about rare book cataloging. And I'm preaching to the choir here, so I don't want to say like, oh, I discovered this. I didn't. But Jim in particular, as a tenured professor of English, was really starting to think, he's like, you know, all the research I've ever done was structured by this technology. And I never even noticed. It worked so well. And I just found everything that I thought I was looking for. So I didn't pay attention. And he didn't have any major complaints or anything or ways he would have done it differently, but he's like, you know, this has actually really shaped the entire field of English literature, and I don't think very many English professors know about it. And it was a really great time working with him, working on this project. And so I encourage you, those of you who have access to catalog records, who can make them available, to invite people to see if they want to come. Start with book historians. Start maybe with literature professors. Start with I mean, you can start anywhere. I happen to be a historian. I worked with someone who does aspects of book history. So those are the people I hang out with. But it's amazing, and you know, then you can create all of this great data, assuming you have access to it and assuming you have time to clean it or normalize it. We teach a lot of workshops at the Center for Digital Humanities on how to clean your data. I teach workshops on OpenRefine. We have workshops on regular expressions. OpenRefine is a power tool for finding variants among categories. Openrefine.org, if anyone doesn't know it. And it's really great if you need to go through and find out if there are typos or variant, depending on the era, whether there are typos or variant spellings. And it's really great at sort of helping you pick the thing you're going to attach everything else to. Basically, pick your preferred variant. But this was 40,000 books, winnowed down from an original data dump from the catalog of about 140,000. But we stripped out all the electronic materials. We just wanted things that were physically on the campus. Now we have HathiTrust and the DPLA and millions upon millions upon millions of volumes. And Greg Crane once asked, what do you do with 1 million books? I was like, well, you better put them in a catalog, right, of some description. You better be able to find what you're looking for. And one of the biggest issues with these federated systems, as you all know, right, is duplicates. And then what constitutes a duplicate, right? So another project that I don't have a slide for, but I can pull up the website in the Q&A if people are interested, is the Princeton Prosody Archive, which is a big project in the center. It's the project of our faculty director, Meredith Martin, who's in English. And she studies the history of how people study poetry. And she started collecting. She actually was working off a pre-existing bibliography that was compiled about 20 years ago of all things prosodic, every material that was related to prosody. And then as she was doing her own dissertation and her first book, she found more materials. And then got a subject dump from HathiTrust of everything related to poetry. But these are mostly 19th century books, and we have a strong book history bent. So a duplicate for us only constitutes it came from the same print run. Otherwise, it's not a duplicate, not for our purposes. And figuring that out is really, really hard and really time-consuming, and is still ongoing. We don't have a team of 20 working on it night and day. At that point, it would be done already. But with a professor and a graduate assistant and some assistants from a Digital Humanities Center, it's still ongoing. And with these large digital collections, these large aggregators out there, I think we're going to see more and more scholars who want to create their own curated collections out of materials like HathiTrust or the DPLA. And HathiTrust has the HathiTrust Research Center, and they have tools and availability for working with full text and creating collections, and they're aware of this. But the question of how you're going to figure out how many copies of what you're interested in you actually have is a really tricky problem. And it lies somewhere on the continuum from traditional bibliographic research and algorithmic deduplication. It takes too long, and it's actually not really going to work to have a person just check every one, because frankly, people get tired. And some of these title pages do look a lot alike, but they're also distinct. Or the title page might be the same, but if you go to page 67, as the graduate assistant started doing, you find out it's a different page 67. So they reused the title page, but they added a preface, or they took out a poem, or they did something else, right? You're all familiar with this. But for scholars of literature, book history, dealing with this level of material is something new to them. And they desperately need exactly the expertise that is in this room. And the center helps with the Princeton Prosody Archive, the Princeton Library, metadata specialists help with the archive. And we've basically been, our first step toward creating a digital humanities project about the history of prosody is first to create a carefully curated digital library of prosodic material once we're certain that we only have the duplicates that we want. We don't have all the duplicates that we don't. So that's another sort of way that this works. And this is where I think linked open data really starts to come in. And I don't have any great major examples of linked open data in my own research or the research at Princeton. Wait, it will happen. Princeton's actually doing a lot of work with linked open data for libraries and with the BIB framework that's coming out. But what I see as a historian and as someone who is building a center of scholars who want to work with these kind of materials in wacky ways that no sensible cataloger would permit. I mean, we want to add all kinds of extra fields. We want to normalize all kinds of things that are clearly not the same, but for our purposes, they are, so we'd really like to do that, and it would be very helpful. And you don't want any of that in the standard catalog record for accessing the materials. The catalog record for accessing the materials works great. But if you want to do it for research, you want to explode that catalog record. You want to add a bunch of stuff. You want to collapse a bunch of stuff. Things. Some of that is just unique to the project and can be within the project, and those data sets can be shared separately if people are interested in reproducing the results or messing with them further, because one project has gotten a certain way down the road. But then there's other stuff that scholars do when they explode library catalogs that are actually really kind of useful, like figuring out those 217 variant names for Mexico City that you might actually want in the catalog. And that's where I think linked open data can be the connection between digital libraries and digital humanities projects, which often look a lot alike. But digital humanities projects, and I don't want to push too hard on what makes something a digital humanities project. See first statement I said about digital humanities and how capacious it is. But if I had to force a distinction between what is a digital library project and what is a digital humanities project, I would say that a digital humanities project is something that is a set of resources and tools and methods that have been brought together to answer a particular research question or a set of research questions. And a digital library is a set of resources and tools that have been brought together to answer questions posed by researchers. So digital humanities projects are basically hyper-specialized digital library projects, specialized beyond to the point where they are no longer of general use. Sometimes you can make general use out of them, and you can make specific use out of digital libraries, so it's not a clear and fast distinction. But the ability to share those schemas against each other when they're useful. So if a digital humanities project actually does a bunch of variant and standardization work on a particular field of a library catalog, being able to connect out say your library catalog is in BibFrame or in some kind of RDF linked open data format, the ability to link out and say, oh, by the way, we didn't have to go back and recatalog all of this stuff, but here is, we do happen to know, or we're willing to trust this source when he or she says, this is Mexico City if you want to go map it. But it's not the library that made that call, it's the scholar, or not the scholar, not the librarians aren't scholars, it's the researcher who has a particular question who did this work. And there's a link there, and the library is, the catalog is basically saying, this isn't us, but we're reasonably certain they're okay. And a framework for allowing people who do this kind of work to be able to say, hey, I think I've got something you would like, so I'm going to link to you and let me know if you want to do this, would be, I think, incredibly valuable. It's a sort of strange irony that book history and its various wings in digital humanities really got off the ground almost at the same time that library cataloging was moving toward minimal processing. Because what book history wants is the kind of cataloging that nobody can afford to do anymore. And that's nobody's fault. And you don't want a general access system that's chock full of weird little niche hyper-cataloged things, because then you've got a bunch of links that go nowhere, you've got a bunch of subject headings that don't match to anything else. You want to have a clean, regularized way of finding things, and people can find what they're looking for. But if you've got these pockets of wacky, hyper-specific, but potentially quite useful information, it would be really nice to be able to link. When I was working on this project, I found a couple errors, and I reported those into the Rare Book catalogers, and they were very happy to find them and change the record. But it was like a handful. But there was no way to give this work back. It's sitting in a GitHub repository as a JSON file, if you want, and it's got the unique identifier from the library catalogs. You could reconnect it if you wanted, but there was no way to give it back. And that's fine. Libraries don't have to automatically change their entire cataloging systems overnight just because some book historians got excited and spent a week with OpenRefine. But moving down the line, as you think about the ways in which the nature of a library catalog or archival descriptions are changing, when new formats come along, when new processes can be put in place, then I would just like to make a plea and say, think about if there's a way, while you're doing this, that you can leave a door open, or you can throw a hook out, that somebody else, you don't know, they may never grab it. But if they have something, and they want to connect, and you have a way of verifying that connection, right? Not just any random person, but maybe not somebody even you've talked to, but somebody whose data you can see, and you can spot check, and you can say, you know what, this is legit. We're not going to claim that it's ours, but we're going to say that if you want to use it, you can find it through us. We will give you that access portal out to this world of research. That would be fantastic. And at some point, someone will build the giant triple store where all of these things will live. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of other infrastructure-related issues to this, how researchers would be able to publish this data so that libraries could get a hook on it, where that would even happen. But I think it's something that would benefit everyone who is trying to find and use and reuse materials. And the organization LoadLam linked open data in libraries, archives, and museums. For anyone who wants to learn more about linked open data, about RDF, they have fantastic symposia and tutorials and workshops, and they're an international community of people. It's you have to start somewhere. They're a good place. They're a good place to start. Or you can, chat up your local metadata librarian, and they probably know about it too. You might want to check within your organization of who already has this specialized knowledge, because we don't always do that. Oftentimes we go off to a website or we go to a conference to learn something that it turns out the person 2 cubes down from us already has. Or we go to a conference in another city to meet the person who's down the hall, possibly for the first time. Because spaces structure things and the ways that the patterns that we get into. So there is value to going out to that conference and meeting somebody else from your campus, because given the path dependency of your life and your routine and those rooms and those structures, you might not run into them otherwise. But, if you pop your head up and poke around first, that won't hurt either. And so I do want to come back to this idea of these structures in spaces, and to think about it with an eye to what I was just talking about with linked open data and catalogs and library catalogs for access, data sets that were created to answer particular research questions and how they might connect. Because that was the other thing that I was thinking. This is one of the formal photos from the website, but I was taking some pictures as well. And what I love, this is another one of the exhibits, it's a rainbow of thread through a gallery, and actually you can see the index cards behind. But there are people. There are people coming into these spaces. You use a space to do something that people haven't seen before, to radically reimagine it, whether it's a physical space or a mental space. People come. People get curious. People want to poke around. People want to go inside things, look at them from different directions. This is a mold of a tree made out of wood, made by actually hundreds of volunteers. Very strange concept of how you get a plaster mold of a tree. There's a video describing it. But this was then made, and people are looking around, and people want to look through it, inside the shape of the tree that you never could have done before, because that's not how trees work. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get people who don't just wander through, but decide they want to stay, that they want to take a picture, they want to bring it home with them, they want to lie on the floor, they want to look up, they want to think about the different ways that the space is being used. And I'm sure that every one of these people is going to come back to the Renwick when it opens with its regular gallery. So they want to see what the gallery, they've seen the gallery one way, now they want to see the gallery the other way. And I think that this, and I'm very, very suspicious of anyone who suggests that technology will solve problems. I think technology usually just surfaces all the problems that we had that we'd found workarounds for under the old system. But I do think that this is potentially the promise of being able to link up bibliographic description, archival metadata, visualization. And digital humanities as a community is sort of in and amongst and around all of them in one form or another. To build, use, and repurpose spaces in ways that we didn't think, that draws a different crowd as well as the old crowd, that makes you see things in different ways. And that's what, when I think of bibliographic description and when I think of structures and metadata and catalogs, this is a lot of what I think I'm going to be seeing going forward. So thank you. I am happy to take any questions. I'm also happy to try my luck on the Wi-Fi and pull up things if anyone would like to see examples of some of the stuff I talked about. Yeah?
Sure, quick question for you. So this model that you espouse of a clean, generalized catalog that links via linked open data to hyper-specialized, wacky pockets of data. Are there some examples you can provide where this has happened, or is this sort of a theoretical possibility with linked open data?
It's both. How's that for a description? So I don't want to suggest that the catalog is these clean open rooms. But one place that I do think really is showing the power of this is the Open Context website, sort of by Eric Kanza. And it's a place to publish research data on the web, to show that data are interoperable. And it's primarily designed around archaeological data and data from, it started out as archaeological data from sort of the ancient world, Europe, primarily, but it's grown, and you can look by where things are, by subject, and this is sort of more of like a data. These are all the weird, wacky, often dig specific archaeological databases. But they have a set of potential ontologies that they can connect to through linked open data. And I have heard Eric Kanza tell a story, which I am now going to retell, about, and I'm hoping I get all the details right. But he said that using this site, there was a group of archaeologists who were investigating fire pits at their site, and the sort of the ring outside the fire pits where everybody throws the things that, you cook your food and you sort of throw the plates and the bones and everything sort of get outside around the fire pit in a nomadic setting, and you move on. And they were identifying animal bones, and they found a biological taxonomy, and they were able to identify which species this was, and they threw that code, the species code, into their data set. And some time went by, and they got a call from some biologists who study that sheep now and didn't know that that sheep had been around for that long. And so these archaeologists had sort of inadvertently changed the dating range of this particular species. Now that's a very small example, but I think that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And so it's about, those are the sort of weird, wacky things finding each other, but those larger ontologies, of which the library has and already uses ontologies, if you could structure them, then it won't happen overnight, and some things will never get connected. I mean, 10 years ago when people were talking about linked open data, and they were like, you'll be able to find anything, you can walk the graph, it's going to be great. And I think we're starting to get to the point where that is really a possibility, but it's, it's kind of like being the first person in your town with a telephone. If you don't have anybody else to call, it's not really going to work. You have to get a groundswell of people who have this technology, or the first person, the first person to have email, right? I'm the first person I know to have email. Okay, who do I send an email to? I have no idea. DARPA, I'll try. So that's sort of the kind of thing so it is happening. It's happening in the wild. It's happening sort of semi-randomly. But I do think that over time, if large holders of cultural memory, like libraries, get in on this, then all of a sudden, connecting into the Library of American University, that's a huge that's a huge knowledge base. And then all of a sudden, you're walking the graph to all kinds of different places. So that's sort of yes, it's kind of happening, and it's starting to happen faster and faster, but it hasn't sort of fully bloomed out yet. And we'll see what BibFrame and the linked open data, in practice groups, come up with in terms of how these catalogs records would get transformed and what hooks would be available. Right now, we don't know. But I'm hoping, cautiously optimistic, that if we can get library catalog data in linked open data format, then, you know, at least the people who are crazy enough to want to do this will be able to. Does that sound plausibly optimistic?
Yes.
Okay. Because there's implausible optimism too.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Well, mine is not so much a question, but a comment. When you were discussing the variant forms in Mexico City,
Yeah.
you're basically affirming the worth of an authority control record and information that would be put into an authority control record. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would have loved for there to, if there had been an authority control record on those records, I would have been very, I would have been very happy. And also to be, full disclosure, because of the period that we were working in, and because I talked to some people who work on book history in Mexico in this period, I also knew that there were like only 2 printing presses in the area. So saying that all of these things were like, I felt that I could have a confidence in asserting that these were all coming from the same place and potentially even from the same press because of the work that had been done on how many presses there were, and when somebody went out of business, they just bought the other press because they were so heavy shipping them. So you have to be careful. In my work, when I work on the diplomats and the consuls, because I'm dealing with a worldwide distribution network, I just say, oh, London, center of the city, sure, fine, because I'm looking at it on that level. But there's also there can be a danger in that if you aren't transparent about the fact that you're collapsing all addresses in London to the center of the modern city. But for that purpose, I was comfortable. Depends on your use case. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Mexico City,
Yeah.
There are also such entities as the federal district in which the city is located, and the county, also called Mexico, in which both are located,
Yep.
all within a state called Mexico, within the country called Mexico. Have you encountered anything to do with this?
So there are wonderful sets of hierarchical geographical data that aggregate, that go from, locale to county to city to state, if you have them, parish, whatever you have, all the way up to nations. Those kind of gazetteers, particularly for the modern world, are reasonably well mapped, and I connected out to those. So in terms of that, and the reason I could get around it in this particular case was because since I knew that there were only like at max 2 or 3 printing presses in the whole place, I was okay. But yeah, no, using the same word to describe multiple different things is definitely something you have to be careful with, and that's where I think, speaking as a database designer and someone who's gotten very interested in linked open data, the idea of the unique identifier that is not the label, becomes helpful and sort of visualizing the hierarchy.
We catalogers do try to maintain both description and access, and that is the goal, to preserve as closely as possible a faithful rendition of the source material, while at the same time relating it through authority records to one entity.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
When you opened up, you said, I largely built this for myself. And
Right.
Not by myself, but a lot of component parts you did do by yourself. I was listening to you carefully.
I actually wrote the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. But here's my point. Some of the best books I've ever written are by people that say, hey, there's nothing like it out there. I'm going to have to write it for myself and by myself. And they produce a really good book. So I'm thinking the same thing. As you put this together, you say, okay, I've got the vision. But there were a lot of steps that you were able to do yourself. So you get the data, you had the vision, I guess the algorithms, the data cleanup, we'll just go through all the steps.
Right.
I didn't think I...
Yeah.
Talk to us about, I think rarely in this room does anyone have those kind of skill sets to pull it off by themselves.
Okay.
We might want to do it
Oh, yeah.
and even for ourselves. So I don't know
Okay.
if you could-
So yeah, so let me also disambiguate the two projects. So there's Project Quincy in the Early American Foreign Service Database, which was a key component of my dissertation. And I was a fellow at the Scholars Lab at the University of Virginia. I had a year of intensive work and time spent by the staff on me. When I got there, I was already a programmer and I was already a database designer, but I'd never done anything like this, and I actually hadn't written any code in a while because I decided I was going to go get a PhD in history. And I forgot to tell anyone I was a programmer because I didn't think that they'd care. In the initial release of Project Quincy, there was some code that was written by people in the Scholars Lab to fix particular problems. But I designed the database and I did all that, but I did it with extensive mentoring. So it wasn't just me alone, with coffee and, the Ruby on Rails book. There was a community of people who supported me in best practices. So there was that. But the data collection was all mine, is sort of in the way that a dissertation research on some level ends up having to be, for the time being anyway, the product of a single person, despite all of the workshops and all of the conferences and all of the advice and everything else. We still have this sort of fiction of the single author. So as much as a book is fictionally written by a single person, the Early American Foreign Service database is written by me. The mapping the Mapping Colonial America's publishing project was a collaboration with me, with Jim Egan, and with a really talented undergraduate JavaScript programmer named Dan Schiebler, who's now gone on to medical school at Brown. This is what it looks like when you're playing with it, sort of live. And also, but with help from the catalogers at the JCB and a wonderful woman named Bonnie Buzzle, who is queen of Millennium at, at Brown. And when I said, I want all the catalog records, well, Jim Egan and I want all the catalog records of everything that was published in the US, in the Americas before 1800, she was actually able to generate the monstrous query that was required for that, because you actually had to go in and query it state by state or unit by unit. There was no hemisphere query in Millennium. So there's a team, and this is actually in large part what I do now at Princeton. Is we're building a team, a center, a sort of hub of expertise and best practices, so that people who have an idea. What we strongly recommend, and what we do most of our time, is that they come in and they do a consultation with us. And it's very similar to a sort of research consultation that you might do with a student who's doing an undergraduate paper in library school. It's like, so what do you want to do? Okay. No, what do you really want to do? Have you thought about where you're going to find those materials? Have you thought about how you're going to use them? Has anyone talked to you about copyright? No, really, has anyone talked to you about copyright? And sort of talking them through the process. And then it's my job and my team's job, and we're project managers and programmers, and we're hiring more people, but we have specialization in network analysis and database design and XML and a bunch of different technologies, but we all work together as a team. And we also keep our sort of ears to the ground for other pockets of information on campus. So we have a fabulous GIS and a specialist in our map librarian, Wang Yaoshawa. We have the High Performance Computing Center. We have lots of other people. So sometimes we take the project on ourselves as a team and work with that person. Sometimes we suggest that they go talk to somebody else. Sometimes we end up doing projects in collaboration with other teams. But a lot of it has to do with having a place that you can go when you have that question, and having a place that will hopefully be able to point you toward the answer to that question with only one, with a maximum of one forwarding. So I'm in network analysis. I think of hops, right? So you get to the node, and that's either the node you need or you hop out one node. So what we hope is that people come to the Center for Digital Humanities, and either we can help them or we point them to the people who can help them. and they really are the people who can help them, so we don't point them to somebody and then they go, oh, no, you really need to be talking to somebody else, who says, oh, no, you really need to be talking to somebody else. So we're trying to kind of map out the skills and research of Princeton. And that's mostly social. So it's about figuring out what if you want to do this on your campus, some of you already are doing this on your campus. I know there's a lot of digital humanities in the area. You know, a sort of basic skills assessment of staff, say like, here's a bunch of things that we're interested in. Who here already knows how to do this? When I started at Princeton, I asked everybody to fill out a Google form of a bunch of technologies. And basically for any technology, they had the choice of, comfortable, new, you had the option of learning, comfortable, or want to learn, or a not applicable. And so, so who knows what? And then kind of aggregating that information. There's no sort of, you just kind of need to figure out what people know and how you can get in touch with them and what their availabilities are and how much they can help. Having a center, even a virtual center, but having a physical center really does help. That's a major resource intensive proposition though. But even just getting a brown bag group together to say like, hey, somebody came and talked to me about this thing. Do you have some time? Could we maybe work this out together? Or, oh yeah, but somebody else came to me about something similar. Maybe they should talk to each other and then figure out if they want to work together, and then they can come back to us. Does that get toward answering your question?
So I think we're out of time now. There is time to mingle a bit.
Okay.
At the end, there's